Okay, well, let's get going. Very exciting. We're starting our first malacha. We're going to be speaking about tonight. The malacha. Again, malacha is like the activity. Um, it's the first one we're doing is called dush. Dush means to thresh. So that will be our topic tonight, threshing. Um, so if you're like me, you don't really even know. I had to look up what threshing even really means. You know, that see this word all the time, but what does it actually mean to do threshing? So Rabbi Ribiat he gave this he gave a nice explanation, which I'm just gonna read. Um so he says threshing, according to most commentaries, agriculture was necessary for the production of certain herbs and seeds from which dyes were derived. After they were harvested, the seeds had to be threshed, right? That's our activity, threshing. Threshing, dash, is the removal of the grain kernels from their chaff as well as from the stalks. So you have these kernels, right? You have these big these stalks of wheat. Inside the wheat, there's these chaffs, and inside the chaff, there's these kernels. So removing them is what we would call threshing. In early days, threshing was often accomplished by humans. People would simply stamp on the piles of stalks, thereby breaking off the kernels and detaching the chaff. Farmers also used hand tools for this task. A commonly used threshing device was the flail. Flail consists of a free swinging stick tied by a rope to the end of a long handle. The handle will be swung downward, causing the free swinging stick to strike the stalks with great force. He says also animals were employed for threshing purposes. Horses or oxen would be driven over the bundles of stalks to trample them, or be harnessed to a wooden platform. They had some grooves and ridges underneath, which would be dragged by the animal over piles of stalks, thereby detaching the kernels. So that's all how it used to be done. But he says in modern farming, threshing is accomplished by means of a highly developed harvesting equipment called combines, which is actually a combination of a reaper, right? The reaper cuts it, and the thresher. This large machine moves along the field and performs many of the harvesting malachas in one operation. So to summarize, what did we just say? We were defining what threshing actually is and what how it was done, um, and why it's a malacha. And essentially means separating something, or separating the kernel from its chaff. Rabbi Ribia continues, he says, breaking the kernels from their stems and chaff in this fashion is the Av Malacha. It's again the father of the activity because it represents the essence of the malacha as it's actually performed in the Mishkan. Therefore, right? So once we said that, any other manner of detaching or extracting a fruit from its stem or peel would be a tolda of dash, or perhaps even the malacha itself. So let's review. What did we just say? That just like with how when they would thresh, which was an av malacha, they would detach the kernel from its chaff. So too, it would seem that detaching or extracting a fruit from its peel would be an ab malacha, and then that would be prohibited on Shabbos, which leaves us with the following question: if it's prohibited to remove a fruit or a food from its peel, or detach it from its stem, then there's some foods which sound like it might be an issue on Shabbos. For example, bananas. How can you remove the banana from its peel, or an orange? Those would seem to be, we just defined what exactly threshing is. The way we defined it, it sounds like that would be an issue on Shabbos. So when we spoke about this in Shir, Rabbi Leibowitz, he said, there are gonna be times throughout this year when we go through the malachas, and you're gonna say, "Oh wow, I really did not know that was a problem," and you're gonna be like, "Oh wow, I'm in trouble." This is not one of those times though. This is not one of those times, and we're gonna come up with a with explanation of why we can have bananas and oranges on Shabbos. So there's essentially two main approaches about why it's permitted to peel a banana and eat a banana on Shabbos, or peel an orange and eat an orange on Shabbos. So the first approach is by Rebbe Akiva Eger, and also the Pri Megadim. They explain as follows. They say that malacha of dash does not apply to relatively thin peels that adhere closely and directly to the fruit. The closely attached peels are considered only secondary to the fruit and are therefore viewed halachically as part of the fruit itself. Hence, removing the peel is no different from simply cutting the fruit itself into another piece. So according to that explanation, right, although removing grain from its stalk might be an issue of threshing, if you have a fruit like an orange or a banana where it's so closely attached to its peel, it's basically, hanging, you kind of have to really rip it off a little bit. So therefore that's not what we would call threshing. That's not dush. That's not a problem. That's one explanation. Um, the second explanation, which is explained by the Egli Tal. The Egli Tal was written by Rav Avram Borenstein. He was post-8th to the late 19th century in Europe. He's most prominently known as the Avnei Nezer. That's his book on questions and answers, Avnei Nezer. But he wrote a sefer called the Egli Tal, which is on the 39 Malachos. So I think we'll probably be quoting him pretty often. And it's a very well received a book about the Malachos of Shabbos, very often quoted. So he has his own explanation of why he thinks that peeling bananas or oranges is not a problem on Shabbos. So he says there's no violation of dash. So dash, again, threshing, this malacha that we're on, there's no violation of dash when you're up to the eating stage, meaning the malacha of dash, threshing, is defined by something necessary to do in the preparation stages. In other words, dash does not apply to peels and shells that are ordinarily left remaining until eating. Um, Meaning as opposed to the grains and the stalks. The grains, they're often separated way before you get to the eating stage. So doing those, if you would do that yourself, right, that's sort of like a preparatory act. And so that's an issue of dash. But you're normally served. You don't need to prepare so much. It's not an active preparation to peel your banana. When you want to eat your banana, you peel your banana and then you eat it. You don't need to prepare before eating a banana. So that's not dash. Rabbi Ribiat explains um, he explains that later. He says threshing is one of the steps in the harvesting process. Typically, threshing operations take place in the fields before the produce is stored and marketed. This is how the malacha of dash is performed in the Mishkan. Because the malacha activity must bear a fundamental resemblance to the process as it was performed in the Mishkan, it follows that only those kinds of stems, peels, or shells that are ordinarily removed at the time of the harvest, as was done in the Mishkan, are the types of attachments to which the malacha of dash can apply. Any additional non-food attachments which are not ordinarily removed and deliberately left attached to the fruits are not subject to dust. With most fruits, peels are usually left to remain in the fruit until just before eating to protect them, to keep them fresh, unlike grain crops that are stored only after the chaff and peel were removed on the field. The peels are not subject to the principles of dash, and removing them, therefore, is not forbidden. So, to review, two explanations. Why can we eat bananas, oranges if there's this malacha called dash, called threshing, which sounds like it means removing any fruit from its peel would be an issue on Shabbos. Answer number one, dash is only a problem when you have these like thicker peels or thicker barriers from the fruit. But for for fruits like oranges and bananas, where it's more thinly attached, that's not what we'd call dash. Answer number two from the Egli Tal is that dash is defined as something done in the fields or in the preparatory stages. But anything that could be served to you, um, anything that is served to you in its peel and you would do right before you eat is not an issue of dash. So what's the difference between the two opinions? Is there what we call a nafka mina, a halachic difference? If if one opinion is right versus the other opinion. So perhaps we can suggest one, or maybe more, but we'll suggest one. Peanuts. So peanuts, what would you say? Is peanuts an issue of dash, of removing, right, threshing, removing the fruit from its cover, its carrier. So according to the first explanation, this is suggested. I think by Rabbi Riviat. Maybe we suggested it also in YU. Peanuts. So the peanut is, according to the first explanation, is all about the thin peel versus thick peel. The peanut, it's argued, is not really attached to its shell, but it's contained loosely inside. So therefore, it would be subject to dust, right? If you take a peanut in its if the peanut in the case, they don't, you could kind of shake it and you hear the peanut a little bit. So it's not really attached. It's shaky, it makes some sounds. So maybe that would be a problem for dust. What about the second explanation? Second explanation is that it depends. Is it in a preparatory stage or is it done right before you're eating? So it could be argued that shelling peanuts would be permitted since it's normal for the shell to remain on the peanut until it's eaten. Um, well, apparently that used to be more common than it is now. Nowadays, you go to the supermarket, you'll probably find peanuts. If you want to buy peanuts, you probably find way more peanuts that are out of the shell than shells. You probably the only time you really see peanuts in their shells if you go to a baseball game, then you'll see peanuts in the shells. So so what about that? How do we define what's ordinary left remaining until eating? If even if you want to say the egg tal, right? That the preparatory versus versus eating right away versus is the correct explanation, and the explanation about being thicker peel is not right. So would it still be true that you could shell a peanut on Shabbos and that wouldn't be an issue of dash? So that would seem also to be a machlokas among contemporary post-game rabbis. So the Shevet Levi, he argues that no, one can't shell peanut on Shabbos because it's nowadays it's much more of a preparatory thing. So that would be subject to the uh the issue of dash. No one serves you peanuts in their shells really so much anymore. But some argue the other way. They say, no, you can shell peanuts. And, we just live in a society of extreme convenience, but that's not really a barometer of what's normal. The fact that, it's still possible for you to buy peanuts in their shells, um, is enough to consider it sort of a home activity as opposed to a field activity, preparatory activity, and therefore it would not be an issue of dash. Rav Rimon argues that, um, you can be lenient, but if you're going to be lenient, it's better to shell them one by one, and like shell one and then eat it, because he said that's sort of like shinoi. It's a change in the normal type of activity. But either way, I don't know how common it is to shell peanuts. Just, you know, probably easier to just buy them buy them not shelled anyways. So that's the first topic of discussion is defining what exactly dash is. But now there's after we define what dash is and understand why we can eat our bananas, we can eat our oranges on Shabbos. The next big topic in dash is the idea of milking. So that's relevant for milking cows, and also for nursing, it becomes very, very relevant. So this starts with a discussion the Gemara has in the Gemara in Shabbos 95a. The Gemara says as follows, that the Rav Nachman, he came to a town and the students asked him, they said, what is, what if someone who milks, cholev, one who milks, what is he obligated for? So he said, if you milk on Shabbos, that's not allowed, and it's a prohibition for milking. So the Gemara, they ask him a few more questions. They say, what about this? What about that? And he gives a very not so ambiguous explanation. So they say Rabbeich Katil Kane Bagma. They say your teacher was a reed cutter in the swamp who who did not know how to explain the mission to his students because he didn't really explain. He said, "You're milking. What are you obligated for?" And he said, "Milking." So they say, "Okay, so what is milking actually obligated for? Someone who milks, what is the issue?" So the Gemara says, "Mishum," because mifarik. Mifarik literally means extracting, and And Rashi explains there that what is mefarik, extracting. He says that's a tolda, right? Remember, we have our av, we have our fathers and our derivatives. So tolda is a derivative. So Rashi says mefarik, separating, is a tolda derivative of dash, of threshing. And therefore milking, Rashi explains that to milk something, to milk a cow, is a issue. It's a tolda of dash. So what's clear from our Gemara is two things. Number one is that there's a tolda derivative of our av malacha of dash, which is called mefarik, which means to extract, and that would be prohibited. And number two is that it seems that milking a cow would be example of mefarik, extracting, and therefore would be an issue on Shabbos. So that's that. Although that's what it seems like from the Gemara, that is so not so much agreed upon. And there are a lot of issues with saying that milking is an issue of dash, related to dash. So the Gemara in Shabbos, the reason for that is because the Gemara in Shabbos, elsewhere 73b, that there's a debate between the Chachamim, the rabbis, and Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim say that this malacha which we're talking about, dash, threshing, can only be done with what they call gidulei karka, something grown from the ground. Rabbi Yehuda says that's not true, but the Chachamim say you can only do threshing with something grown in the ground. So if that rule is correct, that you can only do dash, you can only do threshing with something grown from the ground, and we say that extracting and milking, right, is a total derivative from dash, means it has to have the same characteristics, right? It has to follow the same rules of dash because it's a derivative of dash. So then how could you say milking is an issue for dash? The cow doesn't grow from the ground, right? That doesn't make any sense. So there are a couple explanations. There's one explanation from Tosos. He says, yeah, you're assuming that we follow the opinion of the rabbis who hold that there's this rule of you can only do threshing from something grown in the ground. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says, no, it's not true. So we paskin, right? The halacha goes in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, and you can even do threshing with something not grown from the ground. But the Rambam, you read the Rambam, then you get into a little bit of trouble because the Rambam says he agrees with this rule. He says, no, you can only do threshing with something grown from the ground, but milking is a problem because of dash, because of threshing. So how do you answer this question? So there are a few explanations of how to answer the Rambam. We go through them very quickly. One is his son, Rabbi Avraham ben Arambam. He often defended his father's opinions when they came into question, such as this one, right? How does the Rambam make any sense? So he has an interesting explanation, which is pretty fundamental to understanding what an av and a tolda is, which is like related to our discussion last week. But he says only the av, only the parent is subject to this rule, but any of the derivatives, the tolda, is not subject to this rule. So if that's true, that's a good explanation. Not everyone likes that. Some say that this rule is not really an ironclad rule. It just means you can only do a threshing. Threshing is only an issue when it's a normal activity, but it's so when it's for something grown in the ground, that's a normal activity. But to do it from a cow, it's also a normal activity. So it's not really such an ironclad rule. Another explanation is to say that, there are sometimes in halacha when we consider animals as if they are like suddenly grown from the ground, since they're actually nourished from the ground. So maybe it would fit into this rule. But at the end of the day, there are some other explanations about why milking is prohibited. Not everyone agrees to this. And they say, offer different explanations from the Gemara. There are at least 6 other explanations besides for the one that say milking is prohibited because of dash, because of mefarik, which is again derivative of dash. Some say it's because of memachik. These are malachas which we're going to get to later. Memachik, which is smoothing. Since you would smooth the udder before you milked it, maybe it's a problem. Some say kotzer, which is like harvesting. Some say it's gozes, cutting, grinding, maybe separating. The Ramban says maybe it's just an issue, a rabbinical issue. The problem with all those explanations, the reason why um, there is a compelling argument to say that milking is a problem because of our malacha, which is dash, threshing, is because there's a Gemara in Shabbos which says that a person can squeeze grapes into a pot of food, but not into an empty bowl or plate. Um, so again, you can squeeze grapes into a pot filled with food would not be an issue, but into an empty bowl would be a problem. And the Gemara says the same would be true about milking a goat. So the reason that it's permitted is since the whole problem of milking or squeezing a grape is dash, which means extracting, meaning taking liquid out of food. So when you're squeezing the grapes into food, right, you're taking a grape, which is food, and you're squeezing that, and the juice is going into more food. So the argument is that what have you actually done? You haven't done anything substantial because you're taking food and putting it into more food. As opposed to if you take the grape and you squeeze it and then the juice comes into an empty bowl, empty pot, then you took food and you turned it into liquid, right? So that all makes sense though. If and the Gemara has a term for that. That's called ochla de ifris, meaning it's essentially if you took a grape and you cut it in half. If you took a grape and you cut it in half, right? You just took food and you turned it into other food. So that's not a prohibition of extracting anything from something else. Um, but that all works with assumption is that the whole issue of milking is an issue of dash, threshing. But if that's not true, then you have a hard time understanding that Gemara, which is why the prominent opinion is that milking is a prohibition because of mefarik, which is a derivative of dash. Okay, so how does this come out in terms of practical halacha? So it comes out in two issues. We'll try to cover these two issues and then we'll stop there for the night. Number one is the dairy farms in Israel. So you have dairy farm in Israel, how do they milk the cows? If they have a bunch of juice, what do they do? So there's three options. This is a big machlokus among the Rebbeim in Israel, the Chazon Ish. But there are basically three suggestions. Number one is the best option is to have a non-Jew do it, a Mir Lanachri. Ask a non-Jew to do it. Normally, it's prohibited to derive benefit from asking a non-Jew to do malacha for you. But the Rush, he has an opinion. He quotes the Maram Rodenberg. He says, since Tsar Bali Chaim, pain to an animal is a deoraisa, he says that's a biblical prohibition. Um, he says it overrides the rabbinical prohibition against asking a non-Jew to do work for you, and you can do that. That's the Rush's opinion. The Mordechai and the Gra, they say you need to pay the Jew because pay the non-Jew so that because on its own asking a non-Jew to do work doesn't outweigh Tsar Bali Chaim, but that's one explanation. Another option, if you don't have any non-Jews around, is perhaps you could do something called the Holeich Leibud. You take the drink and you make it destroy it right away. The Gemara in Shabbos says squeezing a pickle for its juice is prohibited, but squeezing a pickle for the pickle itself, let's just say you want to eat the pickle, but you don't want it to be juicy. So you just want to squeeze the pickle out, not because you want the pickle juicy. So the Gemara says that's permitted. So the there's explanation if that's really totally permitted or if that's really just a rabbinical prohibition. But the Chazon Ish suggested this, that he said if the milk is destroyed right away, then that's called milking for another purpose. And then that's not an issue because you're not really even milking. You're doing something else. You want the milk to be destroyed right away. Another option is, you put a Shabbos clock on the machine, some sort of like grandma. But those are the main options there. There's a very in Israel apparently, they have like two big dairy farmers. They have a Mahadran, like more like a better line, and non-Mahadran line. So the Mahadran the hot margarine line comes from milk that dairy farm that guarantees the milk is milked in a halachic permissible way. They make sure they use non-Jews to do it. The non-Mahadran uses milk from dairy farms where it's milked by non-religious Jews on Shabbos. So the question is, how is that permitted? How can how can you drink the non-Mahadran? So their explanations, perhaps if a Jew does malacha on Shabbos on purpose, um, while he can't get any benefit from it, other Jews can get benefit from it after Shabbos. There's also maybe the milk was from a bottle that was, who says the milk that you're drinking was from a bottle that was milked on Shabbos? And even if it is, maybe it's nullified with the rest of it. That's the issue of dairy farms in Israel. The other very relevant issue is nursing mothers. Rabbi Ribbayat, he writes that nursing an infant on Shabbos is permissible only if the child feeds directly from the mother. However, pumping the milk into a bottle or container to save for later use is mefarek, right? That's our issue. Mefarek mean deraisa, biblical. Said if the child is ill and cannot nurse directly from the mother, the milk may be saved in small increments for the baby. A nursing mother who's experiencing pain due to fullness may express or pump with a hand pump, he writes, non-electronic device, the excess milk for relief. However, the milk must go directly to waste. It should not be collected in a cup or other container, even if it is to be discarded. To save the milk, even under these circumstances, may be a malacha, since the milk was first rendered into a usable state. Practical solution is to pour some liquid soap into the cup beforehand. In this way, the excess milk becomes immediately unusable. This is the same argument the Chazon Ish used for the milking of the cows. That if you're doing it, you're taking the milk and you're destroying it right away. That's what we'd call a malacha she'ein tzricha lagufa, malacha done in like not normal manner, and therefore not would not be would be this that would be the solution here. Yeah, but this is a not such a simple question, and for if someone would have to before discussing these things and deciding, one should probably ask their local Orthodox rabbi what to do in this sort of situation. Shlomo Zalman apparently has a heter. He permits it because the Ramban has the idea that he holds that any activity done in a kila achar yad, which means like in an unnormal way. He says that it's all permitted. You can do that for a cholesh ein bo sakana, a sick person who's not we don't think necessarily they're in danger. So he says since we treat a baby like a cholesh ein bo sakana, we treat a baby like always like one who's sick but not dangerously ill. So it's permitted to pump and save the milk, provided it was done in a non-normal manner. Many poskim do not rely on this, but again, one who has these issues should discuss with their local rabbi. Okay, so we'll stop there. We still have a little bit to go left in Dush, but those are some of the issues so far as relates to this malacha.